This story makes you think about personal morality, the power of forgiveness, and the eternal struggle between heart and mind. It's a thought-provoking, unpredictable, and deeply human story. It's about a world where every step can lead to unforeseen consequences. My phone buzzed on Thursday afternoon at 4:10. I knew what the text would say, but I looked anyway. It was from Emerson Burke, my PI. My wife was Martha Harrington. She was a wife, mother, sister, daughter, and friend, as well as a senior partner at Willington Compton, a top law firm in Hartford. As a senior partner, one of Martha's jobs was to manage the workload of 7 junior partners. She held 2 mandatory meetings a week for them. These were on Monday mornings at 10. The meeting started at 4 sharp. If you were late, you'd catch it from Martha for the entire meeting. The sheriff who delivered the divorce papers to Martha had interrupted the Thursday meeting at 4:02. As instructed, Mrs. Harrington, your husband is seeking a divorce. You've been officially served after 23 years of marriage. I knew my wife well. She'd be pretty humiliated after being served in front of her subordinates. Despite the anger spreading through her core, she wouldn't rush home. Instead, she'd lock herself in her office and review. As only a skilled attorney would, I read the divorce petition carefully. I suspected the first reading of the legal papers was more than a little confusing. I listed the classic irreconcilable differences as the reason for the divorce. Martha would be thankful that the reason listed wasn't adultery, but she would suspect I knew something about her long-term. She was also having an affair with Michael Kinsley, who was 29 and married. But that's not the only thing that would make her confused about the division of assets. We'd be splitting the proceeds from the sale of our 7. The house is 000 square feet and is on our beachfront property on the Connecticut shore. Martha would keep her retirement and I'd keep mine. After paying off our debts, we'd split our banking and checking accounts. We both made a lot of money, so there was no need for alimony. She'd be surprised when she got to the end of the legal papers and saw that my very successful third-generation engineering firm wasn't listed as an asset. Martha knew my divorce attorney by reputation, and had she'd recommended her to a few friends who needed those types of services, she'd commented many times over the years that my attorney was a shark. She'd be stunned that someone who was so well respected in legal circles would be so careless as to leave out any mention of the business. I knew she'd suspect a rat, but she'd be stumped as to what the rat was. After a second detailed reading of the petition to confirm that her duck buddy wasn't mentioned, Martha would call an emergency meeting, a meeting of her closest colleagues and associates. They'd all look over the papers and come up with an initial plan to deal with me. My name is Chris Harrington. I met Martha at the University of Connecticut. She was a second-year law student, and I was finishing my PhD in mechanical engineering. We started dating 1 week after meeting, and quickly became exclusive. We were walking to the car after a delicious dinner on our 3rd date when Chris said, "Let's go to." Martha said we made love for the rest of the weekend. Our sex life was fantastic. We all agreed that we'd never include others in our sex lives, and would remain exclusive. We confirmed our pledge to each other when we vowed to love, honor, cherish and remain faithful to each other at our wedding, which took place 2 weeks after we both received our advanced degrees. Our wedding was a fairly large affair. It was held in Martha's hometown. We got married in Portland, Maine. The reception was under tents on a warm, clear summer night at a wedding venue along the Rocky Coast. We honeymooned in a villa but returned without any tan lines. Martha had started the interview process with several Hartford area law firms before graduation. 2 weeks after our return, she was offered a job at Willington in Compton. We spent the next 2 decades falling deeper in love, raising 2 wonderful children and getting used to the responsibilities that come with it. I took over the reins of our family business and bought my dad's shares when he retired 12 years ago. Martha became a junior partner at her law firm 7 years into her career and a senior partner at year 16. Life was great until I found a letter just over 3 years ago. I received an anonymous letter in the office. The envelope was addressed to me and the words, "Personal and confidential," were scrolled across the bottom. Inside the envelope was It was just a folded piece of notebook paper with the words, "Your wife is ducking Michael Kinsley." There was also a photo of Martha and Michael in the open doorway of what looked like a motel. I hired a highly recommended private investigator, and within 2 months I had a ton of evidence of Martha's infidelity. After another month of thinking, planning, and pretending to be a loving friend and devoted husband to Martha, I put my team together. The team included my PI, a divorce attorney. I also got my business attorney and my personal accountant on board. I told them what I and said it would probably take a few years to get everything set up. Their job was to confirm at every step that my actions were legal and couldn't be used against me in our divorce. The second text from my PI came through 10 minutes before 6 that same afternoon. Michael Kinsley has been served. My PI had met with Rachel Kinsley 2 weeks earlier. He shared what had become a 3 after a year-long investigation and a mountain of evidence of and between my wife and her husband. They recommended my divorce attorney, who was happy to take her case. I figured that any plans the group at Willington and Compton had come up with to fight my divorce petition were out the window, because Michael's wife had listed adultery as the reason for her divorce. Her divorce petition included the PI report, photos, and videos, making it a pretty comprehensive package. The garage door rumbled at 8:10 that night, for hours after Martha was served. I was wondering if my 3 years of planning would trump or war counsel. I was sitting at the head of our 10-person dining room table. I'd poured Martha a glass of her favorite red wine and put it on the table in front of her seat. I heard the door from the garage open. The kitchen was open, and Martha called out. I took my first sip of slightly chilled bourbon. She first looked into the family room, then my office, and finally the living room before I saw her in the archway to the dining room. Martha looked at me, surveyed the setup, and then moved to the chair at the far end of the table. After sitting, she reached for the glass. The glass toasted me with thanks for the wine and took a long pull. It took a few beats before she spoke. I don't want a divorce, I know, and I don't want a slop for a wife. Chris, please let's talk like adults. Yes, I've had an affair, but I'm not a slut. Let me tell you something, Martha. I don't have to remind you that you've been seeing someone else on the side for at least the last few years. I have evidence that you've been sleeping around. I could tell you wanted to lash out. Your face was red and you were breathing heavily. I watched her mouth as she tried to calm herself. Why did you have to ruin Michael's family? He has 2 wonderful children who will now grow up without a father at home. I actually had to laugh and shake my head. I replied calmly, have you seen Rachel Kinsley? She's a knockout. Her kids will have a new father at home. Before long, he'll probably stop cheating. I like your duck toy. I paused for a moment, then continued. Why would I care about that family? He didn't care about my family. I've asked you to speak to me like an adult. Your language isn't helping. I smiled, which I knew would annoy her. Martha, I'm trying. If you don't like my language, you can leave. I won't stop you. Martha didn't move. How long have you known? Instead of answering her question, I looked through the props I'd put in front of me before Martha arrived. I picked up a copy of The Anonymous. I showed her the material that had been delivered to my office and pushed it across the table. Martha took out the short letter and the photo after examining them. She looked at the face of the envelope and read the postmark. 3 years you've known for 3 years, but you haven't done anything, she said. Believe me, I've done a lot, I replied. Martha, you had a 4. I've had an hour-long meeting at work today to prepare for this talk. I've had 3 years to prepare, so I finished that sentence and saw a shadow of deep concern cross Martha's face. I didn't want to go there yet, for instance. We haven't had sex since I found out, other than a peck on the cheek. We don't have much intimate contact these days. It's been 3 years since you and I have had a loving hug, and you haven't even noticed. I thought I'd lost interest in sex, but it seems I was wrong. Martha commented, getting a laugh from me. I told her. I thought for a couple of seconds. Have you really gone 3 years without sex? I smiled. I've gone 3 years without sex with you. I've had plenty of sex. Martha was stunned as she sat back in her chair. I continued. I have video proof of much of your SL asterisk sting around you. You don't have the same proof against me. Chris, I love you. I always have my time with Michael. It meant nothing. It was simple stress relief, especially after you stopped having sex with me. Martha pleaded. Don't go there. Martha, your ongoing weekly 3-year affair is your fault. Don't you dare try to blame me. The affair is your fault. Don't try to blame me. Martha took a full minute to calm down and then continued regardless. I love you and I know you. You love me. You're wrong. Martha, for 3 years you've constantly lied to me. You've broken our wedding vows, and you've also cheated on me. You've degraded and humiliated me in the worst ways possible. It took a while for the love to fade, but I don't love you, and I don't even like you anymore. The tears Martha had kept in check spilled from her eyes as she jumped to her feet and ran from the room. I didn't follow her to the room because I knew she'd be back. I suspected she'd return in attack mode, and I was right. Martha had changed into jeans and a blouse before she came back. She sat and refilled her glass from the bottle of wine I'd left at her end of the table. Chris, I think you really need to rethink things. I've got a great team at the office, and we've also got an outside divorce attorney. You'll lose a great deal if you go ahead with this. I know Sharon Brown is a good lawyer, but I've already found some glaring mistakes in the petition she prepared. If we can't come to some kind of decision on how you and I can move forward, I'll bring in my team. I could see that my smiles and laughter were taking a toll on Martha once again, so I smiled broadly. That's the difference between your team and my team. I'll unleash my team on you. The morning my team has been slowly and methodically implementing my plan for 3 years, your team starts the war tomorrow. But my team's work is done. I let that sink in before I continued. I'll take you at your word that you love me. I'm not sure how that's possible given the 3 years of deceit, but I'll accept you love me. I can almost guarantee that by the time our divorce is granted, you'll hate my guts. The funny thing is that everything you'll hate me for has already happened. You just don't know about it yet. Martha hollered, You'll never. I'm not going to try to turn our kids against you. In fact, I haven't talked to them. I'm going to call them over the weekend, along with both sets of parents and our siblings. I'm going to tell them that I filed for divorce because of your long-term affair. I'll tell the kids and my family that I expect them to treat you with respect. Hopefully they'll continue their relationship with you, but it's up to them if anyone doesn't believe the depth of your betrayal. If you don't want them to see the PI report, you can simply confirm your affair. Martha hated losing and she was starting to understand she was way behind. With each verbal volley, I gained more ground, even though she exploded. I'm going to take your company away from you. The first half of my destruction of Martha had just been launched. She expected a threat against my farm would be my ace, but instead I sent her attack back. I told her, What company is that? She looked at me as if I had 2 heads and sneered. Precision engineering. I'm going to take it over. My grin lasted a while. In fact, she shouted before I answered, using the most condescending voice I could muster. Sweetheart, don't you remember? We sold PE to the Sweets 2 years ago, which is illegal. The company is a family asset and I didn't agree to the sale. I didn't say you agreed to the sale. However, you did give me a very broad power of attorney for all things to do with the company. In fact, your firm wrote the document. I used the POA to complete the sale and invest the money in overseas accounts as you do each year. You personally signed our family tax documents, which clearly listed the sale and movement of money. Good luck finding the money after 2 years. Martha was in shock as she sat there. Her mouth moved like a goldfish blowing bubbles. I got up, left the room and walked upstairs to our guest room. After locking the door, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally cried. My alarm went off at 3. The next morning, I got up, showered, and left for the airport to fly out of Florida to start my single life. I'd bought a condo on Clearwater Beach, across the bay from Tampa. I spoke to Martha that night. I thought it would take her and her legal team a few weeks to look through all the legal documents and financial statements before they realized that almost $34 million from the sale of PE had never been under the jurisdiction of a U.S. bank, so wouldn't be part of the divorce settlement. That was a shock for a lifetime of family. If tradition was anything to go by, the other half of my plan would happen in 5 weeks on the Friday after Thanksgiving. When Martha was growing up, she was extremely close to her maternal grandmother, Edith. Edith would plan a weekly outing for only the two of them. As the decades passed, Martha took over the planning. She drove to Port Maine once a month to visit her and take her from her assisted living facility. They'd go to lunch, and if Edith was well, they'd go to the mall. A family tradition started by Edith and continued by Martha for the last 15 years was to display a nearly 175-year. Every Christmas, we set up an old family nativity scene on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Martha would go to our local bank and get the 24 figurines that made up the nativity scene from a very large safety deposit box. Each figurine was in a velvet box. The kids and I would go out and pick 12 trillions Christmas trees. Our family had the whole day to decorate our home. The highlight was the nativity scene, which was placed on a straw-covered table between the two trees. 3 rows of poinsettia flowers were placed in front of the table to protect the valuable figurines from our guests. Once the decorations were in place, Martha would stand in front of her beloved nativity scene without fail. Tears would run down her cheek. In fact, over the course of the holiday season, Martha would cry on a daily basis. She admitted that every time she looked at the scene, it reminded her of all the joys in her life. She was flooded with memories from the past and the present. We left the decorations up until the day before we went back to work after the holiday season. On that day, we'd put everything back the way it was. Martha would carefully wrap each figurine and put them on the kitchen counter. The next day, I'd stop at the bank on the way to work and put the boxes back into the safety deposit box for safekeeping until they were needed the following year. Most of my plan to divorce Martha didn't take 3 years to complete, but one element was done during the first year. Over the last 3 years, I'd planned a business trip for the start. My flight wasn't until noon, so I started my day in my home office instead of the office. The first day of work, Martha and I had breakfast together. I helped her carry the box figurines to her car. She wished me well and gave me a kiss on the cheek before leaving for the bank. I stopped by the bank on my way to work last year. I finally got to make a slight change to my plan, which I'd been waiting for. As we got dressed, Martha asked Chris, "Can you do me a favor?" I looked across our bedroom and said, "Sure, what is it?" She replied, "I expect a pile of work when I get in this morning. Do you have the time to take the figurines too?" I thought for a second and smiled. "That'll be easy enough. I'll take care of it." As I guessed, Martha's text arrived just before noon on the Friday immediately after Thanksgiving. "Martha, where are my figurines? I'm in hall. Year." My old divorcing neighbor was walking outside of my bedroom and saw the stream of coffee fly. She laughed along with me. "Do you need to answer that text? Or can you give me a quick duck before I have to leave?" Kate took a quick shower, dressed, gave me a kiss and left for home. After she left, I checked my phone and found several texts and phone calls from Martha, her family members and our kids. I didn't want to talk to Martha, but I decided it would be easier to call her than to talk to everyone else. Martha hissed when she answered, "Chris, what took you so long to call?" Back then, I was ducking one of my neighbors. Martha took a moment to calm herself and continued. "I want my nativity scene and I want it now. Go to the bank and get it, Chris. I know you didn't take them back to the bank last year." The last record for accessing the safety deposit box was when I took the figurines out last Christmas. Before she could continue, I asked, "Why didn't you return them last year? As you clearly know, you agreed to take them to the bank for me. Please, Chris, please give my treasures back to me." "I'm sorry, Martha, but you're wrong. I remember putting, "Martha, you know I put the boxes in the boot of your car before you left for work, just like almost every other year. What are you trying to do?" "Martha, you started crying." "Oh God, why are you doing this to me? I know you're angry, but why would you be this awful to me? It's amazing that you refuse to take any responsibility." I told Martha that she needed to take responsibility for her actions. I hung up the phone and decided to reach out to everyone who'd called. I phoned them with the same message. "Martha is trying to cause problems as our court date approaches." I wasn't sure if anyone believed me, but I was positive no one did. I had proof that I had the figurines, and our divorce was finalized 14 months after I filed. Martha fought it at every turn and threw up roadblocks involving the police and insurance investigators in the disappearance of her and it. My only comment on the matter was that, as I recall, I put all 24 boxes of figurines into the boot of Martha's car. I would have been surprised if anyone believed me, but they couldn't prove I took Martha's family heirloom. Martha and I saw each other a few times a year at events hosted by our children. We were respectful of each other, but tried to keep our distance. 14 years after our divorce, I found out Martha was fighting a losing battle with an aggressive form of breast cancer as her days were coming to a close. My daughter called and asked if I'd visit her mother when I entered her hospice room the next day. Martha was sleepy, so I watched her for almost an hour and had to fight back tears on a number of occasions as I took a walk down memory lane. I must have been daydreaming because she startled me. "You were right." I looked up at the smiling face of my only bride and smiled back. "Of course, I was always right, but I was curious to know what you meant by that." Her smile flickered as she spoke. "You told me that my love for you would turn to hate by the end of the divorce, after all of the awful things I did to you and our family. I'm embarrassed to tell you that I hated you for a long time." "Martha, you were right." Her smile came back and we chuckled together. "Chris, do you still hate me?" I thought for a moment. No, hate takes too much energy. I didn't have the strength after a while. "How about you, Martha?" She had started nodding in agreement before I finished my sentences. "I agree. After a while, hate isn't worth the effort." We talked for close to 2 hours. I was finishing I was telling Chris about when our kids were young. I looked up and saw Martha had fallen asleep. I thought about leaving, but then I realized it might be the last time I'd see her alive. So I stayed and we chatted some more after she woke up from her hour-long nap. We were laughing together like fools as our son Brian, his wife Sue, and our 3 grandchildren. When I walked in, I could tell straight away that Brian was happy to see me. I didn't stay long though, as I wanted Brian and his family to be able to spend time with Martha. I said my goodbyes and gave her a quick kiss before leaving. "Chris, could I ask you a favor?" I gave Martha a nod and she looked at Brian. "Would you give your dad and me a moment of privacy?" Brian and Sue picked up their kids and left quickly when we were alone. Martha continued. "I'd like Brian's family and Rose's family to take it in turns to put up the nativity scene at Christmas. Do you think you could help make that happen?" Black Friday 2018. While many families spent a Friday after Thanksgiving looking for bargains at the local mall, my family spent the day at my daughter's home, Rose's family, along with her brother Brian and his family, and I decorated the house. We put candles and wreaths on each window, lit the lights on the bushes that surrounded the front yard, and scattered Christmas-themed knickknacks throughout each first-floor room. We all agreed that the showcase decoration was in Rose's family room. We decorated 2 large 12-foot trees and put a straw-covered table between them in front of the table. We put 2 trees up and put a straw-covered table between them in front of the trees. We put 3 rows of poinsettias on the table to protect the nativity scene. Martha's nativity scene was on the table, with the 24 pieces spread out. Brian and Rose came over as I was leaving for the night. I looked at the figurines one last time and started crying. I remembered how Martha used to stand in front of the display, crying, and saying it was her happy place. This story shows that true conflict resolution takes time and self-reflection. Reflection and a willingness to compromise. Story 2, John. The alarm blared at 6 midnight, signaling the start of another day. Jessica, my wife, and our friend Rose greeted me as the early morning light flooded in. I let out a groan, feeling the weight of fatigue as I sat up and swung my legs over the edge. "What's with the dramatics? You sound like you're ancient," Jessica teased, making her way to the bathroom. "I might as well be put through last night," I joked, thinking back to the evening's events. Jessica certainly knew how to keep things interesting. Today marked the beginning of her business trip, leaving me to fend for myself for the rest of the week. The thought didn't exactly fill me with enthusiasm as the sound of the shower filled the room. I thought about joining her, but decided against it. Last night had taken its toll and I needed a moment to recover. Jessica came back to the bedroom with an air of energy, which contrasted sharply with my sluggish demeanor. "Come on, sleepyhead, it's time to rise and shine. We've got bills to pay," she urged. Miming me playfully, all right, I'm getting there," I mumbled, dragging myself to the bathroom for some much-needed revitalization. Eventually, we reconvened downstairs for breakfast before parting ways. Jessica was heading to the airport while I was off to the daily grind. Jessica was an attorney and I was also in a medium-sized manufacturing plant in St. Louis. Jessica worked in a medium-sized manufacturing plant in St. Louis. She was an expert at negotiations and often traveled with teams for off-site work, like the trip to Denver to negotiate a new subcontract with a major aerospace firm. These negotiations happened several times a year and each trip lasted at least a week. Jessica was 5 feet 4 inches and 125 pounds with a feminine figure, 34 and 35. I was completely smitten by her charm and allure. I'm John Baker, an engineer at the same company as my wife. I'm 37 and I'm 6 feet 1 inch tall, weighing 165 pounds, thanks to regular workouts. Jessica and I share a passion for golf and often play with friends. Our love story began at a company picnic where I knew straight away she was the one for me. It was mutual. We started dating and got engaged just 6 months later. Now, 7 years into our marriage, we recently bought our dream home. We'd always planned to start a family there. Jessica was going to become a stay-at-home mom. At the time, I was working as an engineer at the same company as my wife. I was 37 years old, 6 feet 1 inch and weighed 165 pounds. I exercised regularly. Once our kids were old enough to go to school, we were really excited to start a family. Jessica was going to stop taking the birth control pills. When she got back from her trip, we were looking forward to the next stage of our lives together. I helped her load her bag into her car and said goodbye with a kiss and a few tears. As she got into the car, I said, "I hope these goodbyes don't last much longer, sweetheart. I'm looking forward to the day when I don't have to travel." "I hate these goodbyes just as much as you do, honey," I told her. "I'll see you on Friday evening. Let's keep it simple with takeout so you can rest." "Bye," she replied before driving off. Her car disappeared from view, then I went back inside to finish my morning routine before heading to the office. When I got to work, I went to the engineering department and grabbed a coffee from the break room before sitting down at my desk. I hadn't even sat down when my phone rang. "Baker," I answered. "John, could you come into my office for a moment?" "Sure," I replied. "Hubert, I'll be right there," I replied, grabbing my coffee and heading to my boss's office. As I entered, he gestured for me to take a seat. "John, I've got something that might interest you. Since Jessica's away this week, I remembered you mentioning it last Friday. Jay Carter, our field service engineer in California, is out sick and unable to handle a problem a customer in San Jose is facing with one of our, given your experience with that model. Would you be up for heading to San Jose to take a look? There's not much going on there right now, and you're right. I'm flying solo this week. When do you need me out there right away? Let Lucy handle your reservations and tickets. You can give the customer a call to let them know you're on your way and to gather more details. I'll get the details about the issue to you right away," I replied, feeling a surge of enthusiasm. I'll head home, pack, catch a flight out this afternoon, and be at the customer's location by tomorrow morning. Have a great trip, Hubert replied. Signaling the end of our conversation, I made a quick stop at Lucy's desk to brief her on the flights and reservations I needed before heading to. I called the customer from my desk to clarify their issue. Once that was done, I left for home to pack. I was grinning from ear to ear as I drove. I had a plan forming in my mind. If I wrapped things up swiftly, I could surprise Jessica with a detour to Denver on my way back. The thought of spending a couple of unexpected days with her in Denver only fueled my excitement at the airport. While waiting for my flight, I was really looking forward to it. I tried calling Jessica's cell, but she didn't answer. I left her a voicemail to say I'd be staying with my folks for a couple of days and to give her my number in the evenings. Everything went well by Tuesday afternoon. I'd fixed the customer issue and got their equipment up and running. Then I got a flight to Denver, which was scheduled to land at 9 p.m. I checked out of my San Jose hotel at 11 a.m. on Wednesday morning and made my way to San Francisco Airport. I enjoyed dinner before my flight and had a brief conversation with Jessica during dinner. She asked about my folks and I told her I was with them. Jessica said the negotiations were going well, but she was tired and planning to spend a quiet evening in her hotel room. We said goodbye and I got on my flight after dinner. I arrived at Jessica's hotel around 9:45 p.m. Once they'd checked my ID, the hotel staff gave me a keycard for Jessica's suite. I quietly went in and saw a lamp on over the computer table with her laptop closed, but Jessica wasn't there. I was a bit confused, so I sat down with my suitcase and checked the bedroom and bathroom, but they were empty. I brushed off the initial confusion, figuring Jessica hadn't returned to her room yet. I thought about waiting or checking the lounge for her, but my attention was drawn to the slightly ajar door of the adjoining room. I approached it, opening it silently and peering into the living room. I checked the adjoining suite and found it empty. I went in and was startled by a groan from the bedroom. My heart started racing and I felt cold sweat break out as I went towards the bedroom door. I was shocked to see Jessica standing there in the dimly lit room. Jessica was naked while an unidentified man lay on the bed, his face obscured from view. My initial reaction was to storm in and confront Jessica to unleash my fury upon the man lying on the bed. However, I managed to calm down and slowly retreated from the door, returning to Jessica's suite to retrieve the digital camera. I had brought a camera to take photos of the souvenirs and I adjusted it for low light and turned off the flash. I went over to the other bedroom door and stood there quietly. I took a few photos of what was going on the bed, making sure they didn't notice me. They were so wrapped up in what they were doing that I was able to capture the betrayal on camera before leaving Jessica's suite. I also found a business card belonging to David Price, our company's chief negotiator, in the open briefcase on the table. I put the card in my pocket for future reference. Suite 1. I hooked up my camera to our laptop using the camera computer interface cable I always carry with our laptops, which used the same photo program. Transferring a picture from my camera to hers was easy. I set up the incriminating image as her desktop background before repacking my camera into my travel bag. I quickly packed my bag and left her suite, fighting back tears.